I just want to ask you about basically our theme here. With our humans in 100 years, what do you think we are doing as a species that will impact our grandchildren the most?
Want to start?
I won't pretend to know the answer. I will give you an analogy. If you wanted to predict 30 years out or 40 years out, and you imagine some slow rate of innovation, we're nowhere near in a slow rate of innovation, like 2% a year innovation rate, if you could measure what that means. To imagine 30 years out, let alone 100 years out, you'd have to have imagined today 100 years ago, roughly, if you look at the exponential curve and rate of innovation. So it's almost impossible to predict. You'd have to have imagined long before television or maybe even before radio what life would be like today. And it's not possible. So the following we can say: almost nothing that's relevant in medicine today. I like to say, if I take the PDR or any medical literature, almost all of it will probably still be right, but so imprecise, nobody would want to use it. So even if I look 10 or 15 years out, which I'm a little more comfortable guessing, almost nothing we know about medicine will be relevant to real diagnosis and teaching, other than one invariant, which is we're treating a human being and the human brain isn't going to evolve much. So what the human wants won't change, but humans won't do the diagnosis. They'll just meet the requirements of the human brain. So with that one invariant that the patient we are treating or the customer we are treating, I hate to call them patients, nothing else is predictable. I actually don't think it's feasible to, if you talked about gene editing 5 years ago, you wouldn't use the most powerful technology, the CRISPR stuff. You wouldn't even know that's possible. I suspect most of those technologies will be irrelevant in 10 years because there'll be new stuff to come. So the power of the tools we invent is what's going to determine the future. The one thing I can say is medicine will be data-driven. It'll be science. It'll be much more science-driven. But I can feel comfortable saying that in the next 15 years, data science will change medicine way more than all the biological sciences combined. The good news is every time data science figures out a way to do something better, it'll open up an opportunity for some PhD in biology to actually find causality, because data science won't tell us causality. So I like to say we'll have 5 times more research opportunities, but we won't use them because you can't understand without understanding causality. But you won't use current tools to diagnose anything.
Yeah, I want to get into what you said about doctors going away, including, I don't know, maybe the doctor sitting next to you. I hope he'll still be around.
Let's be careful. I didn't say that. What I said was we wouldn't use doctors to do diagnosis.
Okay.
I mean, I can prove we know irrefutably that the placebo effect works. And that's why I point out we'll still be treating the person, and that brain won't evolve. The placebo effect proves there's a role for the human in medicine. But
I'm not sure what that says about doctors, but yes.
No, it says the following very logical conclusion. If the human element of care is important in treating a patient, because the patient's brain won't have evolved from where it is today, whether you're talking about 15 years or 100 years, then you'd select the doctors or treat healthcare professionals, I should say, with the most EQ, not the highest IQ. And last time I gave a talk at the Stanford Med School, I said if I wanted to be a really good diagnostician, I wouldn't go to the med school, I'd go to the math department at Stanford. If I wanted to treat the patients best, I might go to UCLA Film School, where we might get the most empathetic doctors. Now, I know this is a radical conclusion, but I can't come to any other conclusion.
Our humanities majors out there are very happy. So, Dean, how do you respond to that? I mean, the question was really in 100 years, but I think the gauntlet in some ways was thrown down there a bit.
Well, first, I'm very honored to be with my good friend Vinod and David and all of you. And I was a humanities major, for what it's worth. And I certainly share Vinod's skepticism about the difficulty in predicting the future, certainly 100 years out. And I remember on my first day of medical school, the dean, when he welcomed us, said, half of what you learn will be out of date. The problem is, when you graduate, the problem is knowing which half. So things are changing quickly. But, and I agree with Vinod that if all we are is a collection of algorithms, then we'll get replaced by an iPhone app, because computers do that better than we do. But what I'm most interested in is what's now called lifestyle medicine, which is lifestyle as treatment, not simply as prevention. I mean, I love technology. I'm on Craig Venter's board of directors. I certainly keep up with all of this. But I'm finding more and more that with all this talk about personalized medicine and so on, that if you give your body the right raw ingredients, you eat well, move more, stress less, and love more, really is what it comes down to, that your body can actually extract from that what it needs to begin healing. I mean, when I speak at the Future Med Symposium or Singularity University, I'm like the outcast talking about the power of low-tech interventions, that we use these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art technologies to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be. We've shown for the first time that heart disease can be reversed, not just prevent it or get better or slow the rate at which you get worse. You can actually get better and better over time. The arteries get less clogged, the blood flow to the heart improves, the chest pain goes away. People who are put on drugs and say you have to take these forever, statins or antihypertensive medications or diabetes medications, people can get off them if you treat the underlying cause. I've been impressed by how dynamic these underlying biological mechanisms are and how quickly we can actually begin to heal. We found that the same lifestyle changes that can reverse heart disease can reverse early stage prostate cancer and by extension breast cancer, can reverse type 2 diabetes, not as well as drugs, but better. They can work better than, it turns out at the same time that the power of these lifestyle changes to prevent and reverse disease is becoming clear, the limitations of many of these high-tech approaches are also becoming increasingly well documented. So it's not like there's one set of lifestyle recommendations for your heart, a different one for your genes or your blood pressure or your diabetes or your telomeres. It's the same lifestyle intervention for all of these things. And it's not that it's a panacea, but if you go back to treating the underlying cause, which to a large degree are these lifestyle choices we make each day, we find that our bodies have this remarkable capacity to begin healing. And so I agree with Vinod that the doctor of the future will know how to enhance the placebo effect. The placebo effect people tend to think of as being like, it's not real, but it's very real. There's an old saying, use the drugs when they first come out because they're more powerful then, because people believe in their effectiveness. And so the doctor of the future will know how, yes, drugs and surgery can be life-saving. If you get run over by a car, you don't want to feed them someone broccoli and teach them to meditate. But for the most part, the chronic diseases that are accounting for 86% of the $3 trillion that we spend each year on healthcare are to a large part preventable and even reversible by making these simple lifestyle changes.
So let's talk about this idea of maybe high and low technologies or health and wellness and high technologies. I mean, you two both work in a little bit different spaces there. I'm sure there's some overlap. But looking out at this framework of in the several decades into the future, which is going to be more important?
So let me both reinforce and challenge what Dean said. Absolutely buy it, but I love the really quantitative stuff that says there was a Harvard study that actually talked about the exact change in gene expression that happens when you meditate. Now, that is taking something that's a lifestyle choice and turning it into something that you can predictably say this is what happens or how to make certain gene expression happen. In the end, the human body is just a few thousand metabolic interacting pathways. That's all it is. You know, it's not that different than the early days of the internet where there was all these routes and routers, and the math behind both those networks is about the same. Those of you interested should look at some of the work at the Santa Fe Institute. The biology of whether it's biology or the internet, the math is the math of networks. We can manipulate it, and what we do, how we live our life, what we eat, absolutely makes a difference. Where I might say we want to go, so I completely agree with Dean there. Where we want to go is know what gene expression changes we are driving for, measure it immediately, and do the things. And it may be just nutrition, it may be your microbiome. There's 10,000 species. When you look at the data from somebody like Larry Smarr at the UCSD, he caught his IBD disease 2 years before his doctors believed he had the disease. Why? Because he saw changes in parameters that he was measuring, and he measured himself for 10 years weekly, a few hundred parameters, including all of his microbiome, and he saw changes. And the doctors sort of ignored it because there were no symptoms. Symptoms is the wrong way to look at any disease. The underlying biological changes are what matters. There's a science and a math to it, and it's predictive. I'll give you one trivial, what I call V0 example. There's a small company in San Diego called Applied Proteomics. You take a blood sample, 300,000 biomarkers is what they look for in that, levels of fractionation on the biomarkers because there aren't that many original biomarkers. But from that data, they can more accurately predict whether you're heading towards colon cancer or polyps than a colonoscopy can. It's a way better approach. Data science is a way better approach to something implausible like a colonoscopy than a colonoscopy. Lower error rate. Now, even better if you can predict 2 years earlier what the changes are that are happening in your body, and then you sort of say what nutrition, health, exercise, meditation might change the trajectory of that. Much easier to make that change when it's early than when it's late. Lee Hood at the Systems Biology Institute sort of saying, almost by the time we diagnose any disease, the networks have been so perturbed and interacted so much, it's impossible to find causality. So he's trying to track people to find the original perturbation in this biological network. And that's sort of the way you look for it. So I'd like to quantify what Dean's talking about, measure it, know. I hate doctors' advice that says, hey, drink less coffee, exercise more, work less, be less stressed, whatever. About half those things are exactly right, and the half that are right for me are not the half that are right for Dean. I'd like to measure all that. You know, will a weekly $5 blood prick give you 1,000 biomarkers? Very likely 10 years from now.
I think we're actually in violent agreement because I like to measure things too. That's what I spent most of my last 40 years doing research using the latest and high-tech, state-of-the-art medical technology, looking at genomics, looking at the microbiome, looking at proteomics, looking at the kinds of things that you're talking about. But I think what I'm saying is really not challenging what you're saying, but building on it, which is to say that, you know, if information were enough, nobody would smoke. It's not like you tell somebody, hey, I really think you should quit smoking. They go, gosh, it's really bad for you. I didn't know that. I'll quit tomorrow. You know, it's on every package of cigarettes. It's not like people don't know any better. The more interesting question for me is not just information. You know, the quantified self is almost like if you measure enough things, that's somehow going to make you better. The information is an important tool, but it's only a tool. You know, if you know, we're drowning in information. I think what we really need is wisdom and a greater understanding of how these things work together. And particularly going back to what you said about the placebo effect, the most powerful placebo is really a sense of meaning and purpose. You know, it goes all the way back to Viktor Frankl's classic book 60 years ago, Man's Search for Meaning. Like, why is it that in a concentration camp you could have people in the same bunker same bunk bed in the same concentration camp, and one did well and one didn't. And it wasn't necessarily the physically strongest. It was the one who said, I've got to survive this because I want to, I need to bear witness to this. I want to be reunited with my family. I've been working with Bill Clinton since 1993 on his diet. And 5 years ago when his bypasses clogged up, and he was told that was all in your genes. And I said, no, it's not all. I met with him, I said, it's not all in your genes. You know, your genes are a predisposition, but our genes are not our fate. You can actually change your gene expression when you change your lifestyle. But the question I asked him is, why do you want to live longer? You know, we take it for granted that living longer is a good thing. I was suicidally depressed when I was in college. I came very close to killing myself when I was 19. And if you told me then I was going to live longer if I just changed my diet or took this pill or did this device, I'd say, you don't get it. I'm just trying to get through the day. You know, the number one most commonly prescribed category of prescription drugs the last 30 years is not statins. It's not even blood pressure pills. It's antidepressants. There are a lot of depressed people out there. And so when we can work, the doctor of the future, I think, is going to have the time. Medicare is now paying for our program, so we've created this structure that enables doctors and nurses and yoga teachers and exercise physiologists and dietitians and psychologists to work together to help mobilize a person's own innate immune response by helping them rediscover inner sources of peace and joy, to connect very deeply with other people, and to rediscover sources of meaning in their lives.
I wonder, you know, I have an engineer and a physician bioscientist up here. You talked about the human body being basically networks, and you know that's where you come from, and you know obviously there's some truth to that.
I totally agree.
Yeah, exactly, but I'm wondering, the two of you, the engineer and the biomedical guy, Dean, can the human body in the near future be defined like, say, the internet or technologies that we as humans have developed and we understand, we built them from the ground up? Can you actually, I mean, that's an analogy that I hear all the time from engineers. Biologists tend to go, you know, kind of look askance.
The problem is that I think the networks I'm most interested in are the interpersonal ones. You know, the sense of connection and community. I think even the word healing comes from the root to make whole, yoga, to yoke, to unite. These are really old ideas. You know, study after study has shown that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely from all causes. Nicholas Christakis at Harvard found that if your friends are obese, you're 45% more likely to be. If your friends' friends are, you're 25%. And if your friends' friends' friends are obese, you're 10% more likely, even if you've never met them. You know, that's how interconnected we are. And part of the problem is that at some point we will have enough information to be able to understand how all of these things interact. But you know, this idea there's like one thing that causes illness, you know, Koch's postulates, this bacteria causes whatever. And we can give this antibiotic to kill this one germ, and that's really all it is. You know, we're now beginning to realize that the microbiome has, you know, literally trillions of bacteria, and there are all these unintended consequences when we kind of have the arrogance, present company excluded. Seriously, no, I have nothing but love and respect for Vinod, is that there are so many mechanisms that we're just beginning to understand that when we start to intervene in one, you know, we often have these unintended consequences, whereas when we just change the right raw materials that we give people, it's like the wisdom of your body and all these millions of years of evolution can extract what it really needs to begin healing.
Let me ask you all the question, one of the questions anyway, from the homework assignment. Do you think you'll be around in 100 years?
You know, I don't even pretend to guess. We'll do the best we can. I don't think it's possible to predict the rate of innovation, but hopefully we have the best innovation at our disposal, especially here in the Valley, and we'll see where it goes. So I'm not going to try and predict it.
Hopeful?
Well, can I live longer as a healthy adult than my dad did? I suspect so. My dad lived to 95, very healthy. The odds that I can do better than him are pretty damn good. What that number is and how much of it is my genetics or something else, I really don't know, but clearly things are improving. But it's also an extremely complex system, and what Dean was really saying is life is way more complex. Not that it's not quantifiable because of that. We just can't do it today. And all that complexity affects the direction. So let me finish by one example that all of us can understand. Today, there's zero chance any psychiatrist or mental health professional in the world can understand somebody's mental health as well as a little mobile app from Ginger.io. It knows better than the doctor, better than the patient, where the patient stands, knows it's going into a manic depressive episode before the patient does. The app identified the behavior change patterns. How often do you text? How often do you email? When do you get out of bed? Do you go from your bedroom to your dining room? I mean, there's hundreds of such indicators. It figures out, for example, that you call your mom every Saturday morning or this particular number. Here's the promising part. That diagnosis is just the first step. I am convinced within 2 years, it'll start to replace some of the antidepressants because it'll figure out at the right point in your episode, a puppy picture or a call from a friend or what's personal to you will change the trajectory of your mental health episode. It will be the ultimate digital-only therapeutic. That will happen in the next few years. We're already starting to see, in fact, the FDA just approved the first piece of medicine that's entirely software that in the formulary is priced as a pharmaceutical. So that's the future to come.
Do you have an answer to the question, Dean?
First of all, I think that's really cool, and I'd love to learn more about it. Second, I want to thank my wife, Anne, who's here tonight. She's my co-conspirator and agent provocateur in doing all this work. We do this all together for 20 years. And third, I saw a cartoon recently. It had Ray Kurzweil's brain engrams transported into a robot that was part of a robot slave colony. So you just have to worry about unintended consequences when you talk about wanting to live forever. So just be mindful of that.
So 100 years?
So I think time will tell.
Dodging. Anyway, that's what I do. Anyway, I would love to go on here. This is a spectacular discussion. And, we were lucky to get them here. And we're giving you a little flavor of what we're trying to do here at ARC, among other things. Pair people like this who you don't always hear speaking together, as I said. And in fact, let's give a round of applause.